Hi, this is Heather Vale, and today I want to talk to you about some conversational concepts. Now, I go more in depth into these in my home study resource, Interviewing Unwrapped, but this will give you a foundation for what I'm talking about, and it also gives you the added visual element so you can actually see what I'm showing you. When you were in high school, or maybe even college, you probably studied a book called Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I know I studied it in high school, and a lot of people that I've met also studied it. And that book was really full of symbolism and metaphors, and you probably studied in depth how certain things were foreshadowed and how they represented concepts that were much bigger than what was actually written on the pages. There was one symbol, though, that really stuck with me, especially when I started interviewing people, because I realized that it was the perfect metaphor for doing an interview. And I call that the concept of the conch shell. This is an actual physical conch shell. Actually, this is the actual conch shell that they used in the book. Well, no, it's not, because that one got smashed all to pieces at the end of the book. This one actually came from eBay. This is an internet marketing conch shell. And I think that it originally came before that from Jamaica or Barbados or somewhere like that. But anyway, the point is, this is a conch shell very similar to the one that they would have used in the book. And what the conch shell represented was order, democracy, and most importantly for you as an interviewer, it represented communication. The way it worked was whenever they had a meeting, only one person was allowed to talk at a time, and that was the person that was holding the conch shell. If someone else needed to talk in that meeting, they would physically hand the conch shell to the other person. Then that person would take the floor. They would be in the spotlight. They would be the one that was allowed to talk. No one was allowed to talk unless they held the conch shell. Now, there's a similar concept when you do an interview. And basically the way it works is you as interviewer are in control of the conversation when you're doing an interview. Even though you're not the one that's talking the most, and you're not the one that's really in the spotlight, you are the one that is in control of the flow of the conversation. It all comes down to you. So basically, when you ask a question, it's like you're holding the conch shell. And this isn't something physical like it was in the book, where they're physically handing the conch shell from one person to another. But it's something that's a mindset. It's a confidence that comes from you. And when you're confident in the concept of the conch shell, you'll find that as you ask your question and you're metaphorically holding the conch shell, people know that you've got the floor and they won't interrupt your question. And then when you're done asking the question, it's like you virtually hand the conch shell over to your guest. And you let them talk. And you let them have the floor. Now, you've probably noticed in a normal conversation, what happens is you've got two people that are pretty much in equal control of the conversation. It's 50-50. One person will say something, the other person will jump in with an idea that's similar or something that's sparked by that, or they'll agree with that or disagree with that. And you've got two people throwing out ideas and an exchange going back and forth. Usually not a lot of space in between as well, because people don't like to have space in the middle of their conversation. So they're talking a lot. And if one person's on a roll and telling a story or going more in depth into something, then the other person is usually doing something like, okay, gotcha, yeah, I hear you, I understand you, and stuff like that. Now, in a regular conversation, that's okay. In an interview, a little bit of that is okay as well, because people do like to know that they're being listened to. They do like to hear that verbal acknowledgement every now and then, but occasionally is when it should happen in an interview. So as they're talking, when there's a space between what they're saying, when there's a natural pause at the end of the sentence, it's okay to say stuff like, or or okay, or yeah, I hear what you're saying. Something like that to acknowledge from time to time that you are listening to what the other person is saying. But what you'll find is that on the phone when you're interviewing somebody, especially when you're starting out, when there's silence, it's really accentuated. So if you allow yourself, there's going to be a tendency to try to fill that silence the same way you do in a regular conversation, but even more so because of the fact that that dead air, as we call it, is really enhanced. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to jump into that dead air, why you want to let it hang, or let it breathe, as I like to say. And in fact, there's a whole chapter in my Interviewing Unwrapped book 1, which is called The Power of Dead Air, and it tells you why you should respect that dead air and let it hang, let it breathe. There's a lot of powerful things that can come out of that. But for now, what's important for you to understand is that when you've given the conch shell to your guest, and they're answering you, and you've given them the floor, and you're letting them talk, don't grab it back as soon as they finish. You want to let it stay there until you know they've finished, and there might be a second or two of silence. And you can respect that, and then you take it back, and you ask your next question. If you're able to do that, you get more of a flow happening, more of a back and forth exchange that comes out naturally, instead of there being fighting for control of the conversation, or instead of there being a lot of talking over each other, as you might have heard in some interviews, where you've got the interviewer saying something, and then the interviewee starts to answer, and the interviewer talks over top of them, and the interviewee talks over top of them, trying to get out what they were trying to say in the first place. And that's not what you want to happen in your interview. And that's not what will happen if you actually respect the concept of the conch shell. Now, if you're doing a video interview, it's really easy to see this concept at work, because chances are you're going to be using a handheld mic. Now, these mics technologically are very directional, so they really don't pick up a lot of anything else besides what they're pointed at. If this mic is pointed at me, and I'll turn sideways so you can understand more of what I'm saying. If this mic is pointed at me, it's picking up me far more than anything else around me. And depending how directional it is, it might be only picking out me and completely blocking off anything else that's going on over there. So when you ask your question, you have the mic pointed at your mouth. That's like you have the conch shell. And then you point the mic to your guest, and it's like you've given the conch shell to them. So basically, wherever the mic is pointed, that's where the power of the conch shell lies. Chances are people won't talk over you when you're using a handheld mic, not only because they know they won't get picked up, but because they see this on TV a lot. They see people being interviewed this way, and they understand that when the mic is pointed at you, you have the floor, and you're asking a question, and that you're not going to point the mic at them until you're ready for them to answer. And that when you take it back, it's time for them to stop and to let you talk as well. So when you're doing video interviews, then obviously this is going to be a lot easier because it's kind of built into your equipment. But again, when you're doing audio interviews, it still works as well. The conch shell is still there. You're not physically handing it off. And your guest doesn't even have to know about this, by the way. This is just for you. But again, what it is, it's a mindset, it's a confidence, it's knowing that you have control of the conversation and that you're handing off the conch shell. And that's really what gives you smooth communication in your interview. At the end of the book, Lord of the Flies, the conch shell got smashed. That represented the destruction of their entire society that they had created. Communication went out the window, order, democracy, all of it got smashed with the conch shell. You don't want that to happen. So if you respect the power of the conch shell and you let the conversation flow, you give it up when you want them to talk, you take it back when it's your turn to talk. If you respect that, then you'll find your interviews go much more smoothly, have much more flow, and you'll get much more powerful content out of them.